Okay, Lou. So I've just made you, but you were way too small on the window there for a second. So
That's all good.
so let's talk about music. So you have a really really cool session for us. Let's
Yeah.
go. So let's talk about the session for a few minutes.
All right. So the session is by an artist named Ray King. He's actually a producer, writer, songwriter, and artist himself. Me and my partners, me and Ayo Wan, manage him. Um, and he's just a talented guy, man. Great song. It's got a Latin flair to it. He produced it. He wrote it. He's performing on it. And it's a part of a project we're working on. And I thought that's a great record to bring on here because it actually is one of the a perfect example of record that you do less is more.
Great. Can we have a listen? Let's have a listen
Sure,
and let's
sure.
go through some of
Yeah,
it.
it takes a little bit to get to the hook, but here I'll play it from the top real quick. You guys can check it out.
Stay on, got 3 shirts that they signed to Adidas. I heard life a hoe, I don't fuck with no one, but I know me a hoe if I see her. Yeah, I'm about to run me a blunt, she about to leave with the beaver. I got so high, I just died, I think I just saw a Leah. All of the bullshit aside, when I look into your eyes, too many lies, these niggas suicide.
That gives you an idea of the record.
It's a super cool track. So let's
Yeah, it's
talk
dope.
for a second about your organization. I mean,
Okay.
I'm seeing a ton of colors here, but everything's very, very organized. So how, when you're starting a track like this, how do you start it?
So for me, I'm like, the funny part about me is like people are like, will send me files and like label everything. And listen, I appreciate it. That's great. But I'm one of the few guys who really could care less what you name them. I'm a big color guy. Like if you notice, immediately like I default to this color for the music. I don't know if you can see. Well, you see my screen, so like that
Yeah.
section, right? See, that's the color I have right there. And that way, when I'm on this page, I love to be able to page through and see that those are vocals, those are vocals. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
All my aux tracks, I all keep the same color. And that's really for me. I feel like I'm faster than trying to read what's going on. Matter of fact, when I get sessions and the clips have names on them, the first thing I do is get rid of them, just get them out.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I like to look at the waveform. I like to look at things in blocks and colors. So, but yeah, I like to keep it fairly organized. I think I'm a little system.
So it keeps it in your kitchen pretty much. So
Yeah, I mean, yeah, we all have our ways. I mean, this is by no means the right way to do it or the way to do it, but it works for me, and I really enjoy that. I'm able to sort of keep that out of my mind. I just go automatically to the setup and I focus on the mixing part.
All right, beautiful. Okay, so what's where do you want to start in this mix? Because obviously this is a hip hop mixing masterclass. So you tell me, you're the master.
Yeah.
Where do you want to start?
Well, I mean, listen. The thing is this: is that the reality in hip hop is like, vocals are very important. Obviously, like I said in past videos, but that boom has got to be there. That kick and boom relationship is so important to keep the song impact from showing the record off correctly. So this song, again, when that drop comes, it starts out real, all musical and builds for quite a while. And by the time it drops, you want to make sure that that drop feels good. And in this song in particular, I brought because, believe it or not, I had other records that had the kick by itself, but this kick is actually in the loop, and I brought it on purpose so people could see that it's not always a perfect world. Because normally you would say, "Man, I wish the kick was alone, and I could EQ it alone and make it work with the boom." But this is also a testament to a good producer. A producer knows when a sound works with the boom, makes my job easier. And the approach is a little different. So that's why I brought it. I thought it'd be kind of cool to throw a record that's not conventional.
We have a lot of questions coming in. Oliver, Hamza, and a few others are all asking about 808s right now.
Okay, cool.
So let's put them out of their misery and let's talk about it's like
let's do it, man. Let's do it.
Let's go and have a look at your 808, how you're dealing with your drums.
We're here to talk shop. All right, well, check this out. So, and to be honest with you, with this, again, and I got sound racks set up. And perfect example. I'll give you the first quick, immediate thing that I was like, oh my Lord, I love this StudioRacks. And the reason why is because of the multi-band split. That's for me. That's all. If that's all it had, I'd be happy. And for example, in this particular case, if let me mute the solo the boom. So
if you could move the plug-in just a teeny weeny bit left as well, please. It's just so it's not under your head. There you go. Perfect. Thank you.
No problem. And I'll show it to you real quick. So
I just got a text on my phone that said Viva tu vida. I look at the devil and told him, God bless you, my nigga.
Second, so the right track. Right here. Okay. So
Wow.
we have, right now, sounds a little crazy on by itself, but this is why I love this multi-band compressor. Because think about this. I don't know how many of you out there are really familiar with this, and I'm going a little too faster ahead of you. Just look the stuff up, man. YouTube, it's your friend. If you go and look at this and you put an R bass on a boom, the R bass is great, but a lot of your top end's gone, right? So then you have the bottom you want, but that top end is muted, I guess, for lack of a better word. Now you got StudioRacks, and look, I'm splitting the curve at 99, and I'm able to pop in a beautiful new saturator. And so that saturator gives me that crunch that the boom needed to cut through the mix to the tone, so the tone's expressed through the mix better. And I'll show it to you without it real quick. I'm gonna get the right one right here. And this is just the top, and I'm gonna cut. And I'm gonna pop it in now. Now, I don't know if you heard that right, but that crunch, a lot of times, is almost more important than that sub frequency. The sub frequencies, as long as they're clean and you know how to compress them and handle them, this is really what makes that intensity happen and bring that boom to another level.
And so, effectively, what you've just done is you've created your own multi-band plugin out of multiple plugins.
Out of multiple, which is why I was like, this is a game changer for me.
That's awesome. So,
yeah,
and it's like one of the other things I'm realizing about this is you can actually do more than two. You can do quite a few more than two and create a really big multi-band, can't you? So
absolutely. So really the what do you call it? The options are just endless. I mean, even the macros, it just gets so crazy that I'm still absorbing it all, but I like to use it when I need it, So as I go, I'm going to be throwing up a bunch of new presets and discovering.
So we have a question here from Bogdan. Hello guys, what about the modern low end? Because usually it's bottleneck, but in mainstream hip hop, it's huge and loud, but doesn't overload the master chain. How do you achieve that?
So I mean, the simple answer is compression, right? But the thing is that's such a simplistic answer, because within that it's so complex. Because the way I look at low end and kicks, because they're two elements that work together a lot, is like a fingerprint. Like not one combination is going to be exact as the next combination. And even if they're the same combination, I'll tell you why. Because let's say you have the same kick and same bass or boom on one song and the exact same patch on the next record, but the record's different. The other instruments are different. And believe it or not, it's going to play a different role. So I've actually EQ'd and approached both of those in two different ways, because the record changes and it's a different vibe and it doesn't work the same. You know what I mean?
Yeah, so there's no rule for one specific sound. It's just a case of understanding how things work, so that you know how to apply it.
Absolutely. That's your best the way approach to it.
So what else do you have on your low end right now, assuming as hip hop is so low endy?
Sure. So pretty much showed you this setup right here for the 808, but then also I have a group for my drums and music where I have a little parallel setup, right? And all I'm doing is just simple parallel. I've got the TG12345, which is a cool compressor to override and to kind of not distort, but to push pretty hard. And then just say the entire music, I'm pushing just a little bit here. I mean, negative 17.4, and just giving it a little parallel push to give it excitement. That doesn't mean it's going to work on every record. On this song, it worked. So this is the thing that I think a lot of people don't get. Nothing is one-dimensional in audio, especially mixing. So if you go and say, oh man, I got my boom sounding beautifully, you bring your kick in, you're going to have to revisit the boom. And once you tweak the boom, you're going to have to revisit the kick. And in some instances, you're going to have to maybe do setups for different tones of the boom, because tonality changes and phase issues come in and it gets crazy. We can talk about booms for 12 hours as far as I'm concerned. But then you got the master bus and you have the group, and then that also affects it, like I'm doing now. So it's not, I wish it was, listen, I'd be the happiest guy if I could have one plugin that I can do that. You know what I mean? But it's learning. You're always learning.
move TG12345
Oh,
to
yeah.
the left if you can, please.
Sorry about
So
that, yeah.
no, you're fine. So it's like it's. I mean, you of all people, sir, are not supposed to remember that your face is on the screen. So
Yeah, I forget, man. I feel like I'm just talking to you.
so but one of the questions that's coming in, because there's a lot of questions right now about low end.
Sure.
Monica is saying, how exactly do you think the tonality of the kick should match the key of the song?
Well, I mean, it's very important to tune your drums, and I know that's, it's kind of what's the word I'm looking for? Overemphasize. You can't be that anal about it. Like, look, not everything's going to be perfectly in tune, but if you have a producer who knows what they're doing, they're going to learn. They're going to know what works within the song, right? So tuning a kick sounds silly to people, but no, it works. On the other side of the flip point of that, sometimes things just sound good. The sound that you picked works, but the tonality of it, especially the boom, has to be. I mean, you're playing the wrong note or out of key from the song. I mean, it's just not going to work. I've done a lot of correction where I put my producer hat on and just kind of fix some of the notes that are not, jiving. So that's a musical thing. You have to understand music. You have to get things where they make sense, and without creating, or sort of putting what do you call it? Stopping your creativity. I mean, some things work and they're out of tune, but generally speaking, the more musical, the better they're going to sound to the audience.
I think one of the things that I would like to add to that, and tell me if you agree, because obviously this
Sure.
is a conversation, is
Sure.
a lot of the time with hip hop, when people are trying to work on hip hop at home, they're listening so loud that their ears get fatigued really, really quickly, and they miss a lot of those frequencies.
Yeah. Well, for one, your monitors are very important. If you're going to invest, in something, probably get a good set of monitors that don't lie to you. That's why I say that is because some monitors are great and some rooms are great, but if they're overemphasized, I mean, it's great, but you want to hear the truth, and your ears are monitors that are shifting. So in other words, like Mike said, if you're working and you're on your 7th, 8th hour and you're still at it and you're going to get fatigued. So learning to step away is huge, man. It was something I had to force myself to do, and by making mistakes, you get that mistake out of the way, you realize, okay, you'd be surprised when you go to bed, you wake up in the morning, you're like, what was I doing?
I think we've all done that. It's
exactly.
Like you go to bed pumped and you wake up in the morning disappointed when you press play.
It's the greatest thing I ever did. You wake up, you're like, what was going on,
So we're going to move on. So Oleg here has a question. He's incredibly polite. He says, hello, Mr. Diaz. Do you use compression for groups, drums, instruments, and basses in those kind of groups, or are you doing it all individually?
No, I mainly do everything individually, but I do groups as well. And every time I answer the question, yes, it's not every time. So in this case, I am. But it's what works for the song. And really those decisions come from doing this a lot, from just flight hours, man. The more you do it, the more you learn. And don't be afraid to make mistakes, man. Do stuff that's silly, out of the norm, because believe it or not, that'll teach you a lot. When you do something wrong, to be honest with you, I think I've learned more from my mistakes than I've learned from stuff I've done right.
I think that's a life lesson right there. It's like,
that's true. You took it deep, though. You took it deep, Mike. yeah.
It took it deep. Okay, so where else do we want to? So we've looked at your 808.
Sure,
we've looked at the multi-band split. Where next?
Okay, so
Diaz?
Let's do this. Let me just grab the 808 since we're talking about low end. Let me just get the drums soloed here. Let's just listen to them a little bit, and then I'll show you the whole fact that the kick is part of the loop. So. All right. So now, that kick sounds pretty nasty by itself. You notice that? But when you put it together with the boom and the song,
I just got a text on my phone that said we were the reader.
That's
it comes together.
We have a short hour, and this is something we can go into super detail, but it's really these tools and how you learn how to use them, right? So a guy like me can tell you, hey, this is how I did it, but then you open your session and your sounds are going to be different. Like I said, it's another fingerprint. So you're better off not taking exactly what I do, but learning how these things work. Learn compression. Your ear, believe it or not, the more you do it, will catch up. You'll understand the concept and you say, I don't hear it. But the more you do it, you'll start hearing. That's what happened with me. I mean, I couldn't hear compression, and now I can't stop hearing it. You know what I mean?
There
So
you go.
yeah.
It kind of ruins music for you. Sometimes it's like now I can't stop dissecting everybody else's songs.
My wife will say that to me. I'll be like, hey, that's a plate.
All right, so I'm seeing a ton of plugins here, but I'm also seeing a lot of StudioRacks. What else are we doing here down in the low end?
Okay, so on the low end, really, if you think about it, it's just a combination of this multi-band split with the R bass and the Berserk as a saturator for the frequencies above 99, right? And just to give it that grit, that drive that I like. And I love the way the Berserk sounds. It's got a cool, and so many choices too. But I love using it on low ends. Sometimes I use the Abbey Roads. It just depends, like I said, on the sound. In this case, the R bass is a solid low end. It worked perfectly. Sometimes I have no R bass on the very lowest frequencies and use an EQ, a pulp taker, whatever works. In this case, that's what's making this boom work. And then the loop, which is right here, I believe. And if you look at that, it's a simple CLA. And that's a simple CLA EQ, right? And look what I'm boosting. Now, you notice the red lights are flashing, and I'm overloading it like crazy. Don't be afraid. I don't care what anybody tells me, man. For years, people will look over my shoulder on the SSL and be like, your gain structure looks crazy. And I'm like, all right, listen, I'm not making videos, man. I'm making it sound good. So I don't want you to be like, screw all the rules. There's rules, that you have to, but there's times, man, these things, and Chris will tell you himself, he made this to be pushed, you have a Ferrari, drive it, So to me, that's part of the character. Some of these things come from overloading them and, learning how to control it. It can't just all be wild, you know what I mean? With no reason.
This is a really fun plugin to use on anything. It's like, do you ever use it in bucket mode and kind of like use multiple tracks?
I've never done that. And the reason why is because for me, the reason why I use it is because I was on the old SSL, which I loved, the E. Yeah. And then when you guys dropped this one, I was like, whoa! Like Chris said, it's super sensitive. It's super. It just gives you a lot. The EQs are, you dial in half a dB and you hear it. That I love it. I love the compression. I love the way it sounds. So now for me, it's just my go-to. I just stripe it across sometimes, just to kind of get familiar with the song and do a quick overall balance. And I'm like, all right, and then I'll take it out sometimes. But yeah. I love it. It is a great plugin. It is a great plugin. All right, let's move on. What else have we got? I'm enjoying this. I don't know about you guys, but I'm enjoying this. All right, cool. I'm actually trying to remember everything that I got on here, but I would say let's move over to the vocals. Not that I don't want to deal with the music, but I just want to show you guys this vocal in particular because this is something that kind of mirrors the video that I did with, I think, the Tony Mike record. But in this song, I got a StudioRack on his lead. I also want to show you guys that I incorporated a little bit of the saturation on the vocal and the kind of a non-traditional thing to do. I have a one knob filter actually taking the high end off the vocal. And people would say, man, that sounds crazy. Why would you do that to a vocal if you want it to be sitting in your face? But again, this is an unconventional thing that just worked in the song, right? And it just gives it kind of a warm sound. A lot of people say to me, vocal's a little too edgy, but I want them clear. This is a little trick that I do a lot where I'll actually filter the vocal top end. I'll play you a little bit of it and see if you guys can hear it as I do it live. Let me see. Cut it out first. And then we cut out that too.
Now I feel like enemies. I ain't fucking with you no more. You know if it was up to me,
without it,
I'd never let you go.
Gotcha.
But you gotta leave.
And then in the mix,
I ain't fucking with you no more.
And you can tweak it.
I ain't fucking with you no more.
So it's a little touch that sounds a little dreamy, and you got to be careful because when you go unconventional, the point of it is for it to give you a feeling and not notice it. You follow what I'm saying? If that makes sense.
I do. Yeah, I do.
So it's people look at it and go, "What are you doing? Why are you cutting the high end off?" But it works. It's a little touch. And sometimes I'll do stuff like this, and I'll print without it. And you know, you got to be careful. You're walking those lines. But I wanted to show you guys this because it just shows you things that are not conventional that do work. So don't be afraid to try stuff.
So while we're on the vocal,
Sure.
we've got Lucas, Kyle, Richard, Johnny, and a bunch of all asking you about compression in different parts of the vocal. So let's go through some answers to all their questions. So I'm seeing two compressors on here. I'm seeing one of my favorite plugins, the C6, and another one of my favorites, the Arvox.
Yes.
Is there any? I mean, is there a reason that you like to order certain compression on this?
Yeah, generally speaking, this is kind of how I go. I pop it in EQ at the beginning if needed to sort of curtail the sub frequencies that you may not hear on little monitors, and you know, maybe like a popper or whatever. You know, sometimes they touch the mic stand or some flutter. Get it out of there because the vocal doesn't need to have 20, 30 hertz. You know what I mean?
Right.
So I do that just more as a safety precaution. But the C6 is where I do a lot of the work, which I've covered before. And again, here, I'm not sure how much in fact, I'm going to play a bit real quick. Let me see.
Subtle.
Right. So normally I would be targeting frequencies I want to pull back, but this vocal has a great sound to it already. So that's another thing I was going to say is, you know, don't overanalyze, don't overthink things. If it doesn't need it, don't do it because you saw it in some video. Do it because it's actually, you know, these tools are to learn and then apply them the correct time. You can actually completely screw up a mix if you just are doing stuff because you feel you need to do it, you know?
Yeah.
And with that said, so you see, all I'm doing is pulling up maybe a little bit of, what is this, about 4 right in the middle? It's a little bit of 4K, just pushing it up a little bit. And I'm pulling back the high end to help the de-esser coming up next, and a little bit of the 4K as well, just to kind of keep it under control. And then I follow that with a de-esser, which I have on everything. I mean, a de-esser is, you have to have it, you know?
Lucas is actually, his specific question is, hi folks, thanks for the opportunity. You're welcome. I'm having trouble with sibilance. What would be the best approach to deal with that, as in plug-in order and choice of maybe mic position, etc.? Any suggestions?
Well, my position is not so. One thing I can tell you: do not record with a de-esser. Do not do that. I've done it with a million people. Listen, you can get lucky and get it right, but if you don't get it right, we cannot do that. So it's a problem. We could, but it's a headache. But de-esser, just learn how to use a de-esser, learn how to do a multi-band compressor. Could be a de-esser where you can fish for that frequency. That's a problem. But usually for me, sibilance, I find, of course, if a microphone, for example, you're using a Sony that's super sharp, super clear, you know, and that person's voice has a lot of like 7K or 10K or whatever the case may be, maybe you want to go to a Newman, you know, something warmer. But other than that, it's usually inherent in the person's voice. Everybody has their own frequencies that jump out more, or they're just naturally more exaggerated. So as a mix engineer, I'm always looking to listen first, just to the vocal, and be like, okay, I see where the problems are, and then attack those. Because what you're trying to do is get sort of an even slate to start making it sound good, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes. I think that makes sense.
But de-esser is your friend, and I love this de-esser. That's my go-to.
Before we move on, Sal has asked, how much did you actually filter off the highs with that one knob?
I moved it. What look at, we're at about 8K. And really that's a little much. I was really more probably around 8.5, maybe 9. And really it was only because I thought, frankly, I don't think I needed it. You take it off, it sounds good, but it just added, it's almost more of a producer thing than it is a mixing thing. It's just felt good. And I was like, you know, it feels good.
And this brings up another point that I like to remind people as well, is you can actually over listen to stuff in solo and forget that a vocal or a drum is part of a bigger project.
Correct.
So, and you're not going to hear that kind of subtle mix that you did with that one knob if you're listening in solo, right? So you're going to hear it in the song.
Correct. And you know, solo is your friend. You'll hear it there. You know what you're doing, but then don't commit to it until you hear it in relation to the mix, and then maybe at that point.
One of the other things I love, while we're seeing so many plugins in StudioRack, one of the things I love about it is it's a bit like colors in a palette for an artist. You
Oh
can
yeah.
save a chain and not even have all of the plugins active, but have them there so that you can. But
Yes.
you also have the ability, as you obviously know, you can drag and drop them and change the order of the
Yes.
plugins,
It's
and
perfect.
it doesn't drop out. So
Absolutely.
uh,
That was another thing too. Like for example, if I wanted to grab this de-esser and put it at the end of the chain or between after the saturator, yeah. And sometimes you would do that because the saturator, back to the last question, I think it was Sal, that yeah, the saturator could bring out those frequencies and you want to maybe attack the de-esser afterwards, you know?
right, exactly. So,
Yes.
Jaron has asked, what are some of the biggest culprits for muddying up the mix? Are there any things you typically do to try and clean up a muddy mix aside from your high pass filter?
Okay, in extreme cases, is I notice producers that are, I want to say they're trying too hard. I shouldn't say that. That doesn't sound good, but who are just overcompensating or maybe just putting too much. They're throwing the kitchen sink at instruments. Well, everything's just too crowded. Like in other words, one Rhodes works, and then they have a Rhodes, a pads. You know, they just stack a ton of sounds. It's a challenge for us because we're trying to have that vocal sit right. Um, but you know, you can't say, "Well, I'm just going to mute all these vocals." I'm not the producer, right? Um, but as a good engineer, you'll learn to sort of maybe use a little bit of like creative work where you could do groupings, for example, where you can maybe put a compressor on a grouping of keys that is subtly being pushed down every time the vocal comes on with a sidechain, for example, if that makes sense.
Right. Yeah.
You know, carving little areas to just make it fit more when it's very crowded. But to me, crowding, actually putting the elements in is what could cause a problem. To me, the best records are when you have clean kick, snare, boom, and then the elements all work together and room for the vocal, you know what I mean? And well recorded. I mean, it makes my job super easy.
So that brings up another question that let me just remind myself if I can, the name of the guy who asked it. There was a guy. I don't know if I can't find it, but somebody asked about panning. When
Panic.
it comes to trying to keep a mix clean, it's like how much panning is involved in a mix, but because this sound is it's a very well known sound for this kind of track.
Yeah,
How
yeah,
much
yeah.
panning do you do?
I do a ton because to me it's all about imaging. I mean, you know, we're now in a world where you know mono is great to reference to mono, and you know, so there's uses for it, and people do listen to on their iPhone, people do listen to on their laptop. But when people are really going to enjoy, at least the music that I work on is going to be in a club atmosphere, headphones, a decent system in a car, or something like that. So to me, the space is important. You know, the imaging is super important. So I love throwing ad-lib vocals fully all the way out, keys, pads, what do you call it, strings out, you know? And then the center, which for me, why I like that is because it leaves the center exclusively for the bass, the low sub, the kick, the snare, and the vocal. If those four elements are sitting in your face, doing the job right, there's a lot of room there, and everything else is over here. It just gives you a nice wall of sound. You know?
Right, exactly.
It's
So
simplified, but you know, yeah.
it's no, it's like, I mean, you got to start simple if you want to grow big.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, Marvin from Germany. Hello, Germany. Hope everything's going well over there.
Germany, yes.
Marvin wants to know if you have any personal favorite mixes in terms of learning, giving people who are learning an idea of technique as in clarity or space in a mix as good examples for people to learn from.
Yeah, I think that what I just covered right before, and for example, in your master bus, or maybe if you move all your music through an aux like I'm doing here, um, a lot of times, let's see if I have it here. No, but I have it on my master here. I'll show you this, which is the
Oh my god, I love
Abbey
this plugin.
Right, right. So in relation to what he was saying, what he's asking, and what I was just saying a few minutes ago, is if you notice here the spreader. Um, I love the way that spreader sounds, right? So even though I'm pushing things to the side, of that to answer his question is one of the reasons why, or one of the things that techniques that helps you make records sound wide and big and imaging, right? And leaves room in the middle for you to really go hard. A good spreader at the very end is also fantastic. And sometimes I'll use a spreader as a let me see how it feels, and I'll talk to my mastering guy. Go, hey, if you feel you could do better, then you do it. But the Abbey Roads mastering plugin is like, I love it, man, because I can test so many things I want to try out with it.
One of the other things I love about this plugin, and this brings up another question that just popped in from Testing Ground. I don't think that's your real name. Who's saying, "Hi Lou, do you work much in mono?" And one of the things I love about this plugin is it lets you take a listen left, right, mids, mono. How much mono checking do you do in hip hop or your style?
I do a lot of mono checking. It's how important it is to me. I don't know if that sounds right or not, but I'll explain it. So I do mono checking because I know people are going to listen to on their iPhone, right? But I have to judge between the experience of the listener, the artist I'm working on, the project's aim, right, if you will. So in other words, if they don't care what people are going to think on an iPhone, then we're not going to care. You follow what I'm saying? Yeah. So if the ultimate goal is to be cinematic and big, then we're going to go cinematic and big regardless of what it sounds like in mono. But generally speaking, yes, we check it in mono because I want it to sound good if you pop it on an iPhone. You know what I mean? I do that.
I think one of the things that that we have to take into account, and this is another thing that's changed between when we started in the industry and people are starting now, is most people are now listening on the headphones that came with their phone.
Correct.
As opposed to, nobody listens on a hi-fi anymore and sits in front of a stereo with an album cover.
Correct.
So, and those headphones aren't exactly the best. So monochrome. So we have a question here from Christian, going back to the vocals. Hey, Christian. He says, "Hey, Lou, how do you keep your vocals so clean from the effects like reverb and delay?" And I'm going to think that you're putting all of your reverbs and delays. I'm assuming you're not putting those on the tracks and you're putting those on buses and sending and then EQing.
Right, you see them here, so I'm sending right exactly. So what I do is I'll for example, this StudioRack, which is the we were just talking about before, has all my the EQ, the C6 where I target a little bit of the frequencies, a de-esser, a little, in this case, some saturation, and then finishing off with an RVox. It just gives it the last compression. It raises the volume, and which is another thing I want to touch on. Make sure people don't. One of the hardest things for people is to use limiters, compressors, and sort of realize that the volume change isn't the what the plugin is doing. The volume is changes. Don't get fooled by the volume change. Listen to it for what it's doing in the compression. It's a little hard to sort of keep your levels right, but my point is that this is just a good compressor that to me also raises a lot of artifacts that I like. Some stuff that it kind of gets it a little grit that I enjoy in the vocal. Doesn't always work for every vocal, but in this case it worked great. So that's my main setup, right? But when it comes to the effects, I'd say 90% of the time, like Mike said, I'm going from a bus, and then I'm sending to my verb here. I'm using Manny's Hall here, and H delays, maybe a reverb followed by an H delay, which gives it a cool little kind of a reverb effect,
And it looks like you're using a bit of the high pass and low pass on the delay. There's a ton of questions here, by the way.
Yeah.
That's how you choose delays and reverbs and on the vocals.
It's about the song. It's about how it feels, right? So, like for example, Mike just mentioned that I have like the high pass and the high pass and the low pass on the delays because it gives you a little bit of that radio sound just on the delay. One thing, it allows the listener. Which is one tip that you guys probably could use, is that when you make things sound radio AM-y sounding, they tend to stick out of the mix easier without having to push them out so far. So if you want a delay that's going to creep out on people, and you're going to be like, "Whoa, that I hear that," without being too loud, that's another. Make it, take the bottom end off of it, take the high end off of it. It's a cool, and I love, as you see, it's a ping pong. So it's moving from left to right.
It's my favorite mode on that plugin.
Exactly.
So now let's talk about. So you've got a lot of H delays. I saw a Manny reverb. What was the other reverb that popped up there?
So I got the reverb here.
The classic one. Yeah.
Classic, right? And it's just it's just a great sounding verb. And in this case, and only because of this particular song, there's a couple of throws, I believe. I don't remember exactly what I was using it for, but I'm following it by a delay. So I'm actually making the verb move around in ping pong. Very dreamy, very washy.
One of the things I love about Renaissance Verb as well is it has an EQ built in.
Correct.
Are you utilizing that much?
A little bit. Let's see. Yeah, I mean a little tiny bit, but
Yeah.
the thing is if you think about it, a lot of these plates, for example, like in this case, I'm using for a plate, right? Plates to me are like very lushy. If you especially make you make the delay or the reverb time long, they can get very sizzly, right? If that's what you're looking for, you know, so be it. But with our verb, the great part about it is you have that damping where you can pull it down. You can sort of with the EQ soften the high end a little bit, so it's a little more dreamy. And even on Manny's, if you notice here, see the high end I'm pulling back right here,
Yeah,
and I'm compressing the verb to give it a little bit more, oomph. But like I said, all these things depend on the song.
yeah. But I think one thing that is probably overall, and I think we'll agree, is the fact that you've got to make sure that your reverbs and your delays aren't using up exactly the same frequencies as a bunch of other stuff, because otherwise it can't breathe. Yeah,
exactly. And to your point, like I said before, with the radio effect, or for example, like with the EQ on the R verb, you're doing it so that you can throw that verb out there strong and not, like Mike said, take over the lane that the vocal's on. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So we've got another question here, asking, should it be a vocal rider on a vocal or a compressor, and do you have a preference, or again, is it per song?
It is per song, but my preference is a compressor. I mean, I use vocal rider all the time. I use bass rider on booms. It really just depends on the song. There's times where the vocal is moving around a lot, or the vocalist is doing this on the mic a lot, where they're like backing off the mic, coming up on the mic. So, I rarely needed the vocal rider, but it's definitely a great tool when I've needed it to use it. It works great. But compression to me is, I rarely can't not achieve it with compression. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's like I remember working with Scott Stapp once on a vocal, and I actually used Vocal Rider plus RVox,
right?
Because he was moving around so much. So it's like the best of both worlds.
But you got to do what you got to do.
So Slava, hi Slava, says, hi, can you please tell me about grouping instruments and adding buses before master, like bass? Can you please tell me about also about side chaining? So there's a couple of different questions in there, Slava. So let's talk about how you group, in this kind of session, how you group your instruments, if we can.
So really, if you think about it, and this song is pretty simplistic. My entire song, if you can see here, the entire music is coming out of bus 40 and 40, 47, 48, and I'm running it through here. So if I solo this, and then I'm busing out of that to another bus, which another an aux, which I consider my master, and then the reason I do it is because I want to put these compressors and these EQs or whatever I want to do to the music. Now, if it's a different type of record and I want the keys only and the drums only, and sometimes it'll be just strings only and Rhodes only and pianos only. It really just depends on what I'm working on. But this is generally speaking. Like again, you don't have to do this. Times I haven't run it through an aux. I just run straight out the master because it doesn't need it. That's the thing that's, I guess, hard for people to understand. There's no magic bullet to what we do. But the tools that you have definitely, it's like building a piece of furniture. You got good tools, they come up better,
Well, it's also understanding those tools as well.
Exactly, so, exactly. Learning how to use them. That's the biggest thing you can do for yourself.
So I have a question here from Earl, who, again, is super polite and says, hello, Mr. Diaz. As an engineer, how much editing are you comfortable doing if you receive tracks that are in bad shape? And is it ever okay to say no?
Okay, so that's a great question, actually. So for me, I go from doing nothing but EQing and making it sound pretty and turning it in all the way to literally arranging the song. Now, there's two sides of this coin. If you feel generous, right, you do it. I come from the school of do what's good for the record, man. If you're too concerned about the monetary value of what you're doing, you're chasing the dollar and listen, or chasing the money, I should say. And to me, that's a mistake, man, because I'm not saying to not value your expertise or your craft, But if you're doing it where a client who may not know everything feels that they're getting taxed every time that they talk about a new thing that they have to be cleaned up, they get turned off. I think doing it for them and explaining to them later that, hey, listen, man, this is not normal. I'm pretty much a producer on this project. They would appreciate you more. And even if they don't and say, you know what, I'm going to go to somebody else. When they come back, it's a different type of talk. Okay, so
That's
good
advice.
A career advice. Yeah, man, just be generous, man, because at the end of the day, if the record does go somewhere and your name is on it and you're credited with making it sound that good and you feel you were not compensated correctly, trust me, indirectly, that will bring money from other sources. I can guarantee you that.
There you go, man. Good advice. Okay, so we have a question here from AJ. Hi, AJ. This is a good question. I was hoping somebody would ask this. How important are reference tracks when mixing, and how often do you use a reference track to fine-tune how you actually mix the song?
Every time. I literally do not mix without a reference track. And when I say reference track, I don't mean just a master song that's out there, a project that I've worked on before that I'll listen to. I do that as well. But I also listen to, and this is a very important, very, very important, the client's MP3. Whatever they finished the night or whatever rough mix they did,
right,
or whatever mix they're not happy with, actually. If they say to me, man, I tried mixing it and I'm coming to you because I want a different approach or whatnot, I always ask them, just send me what you have, because that is information for me. I can hear and go, oh, you want this, and you wanted blue and they gave you orange. You know what I'm saying? So information is what, to me, references give you. Likewise, a song that's mastered already and it's out there, it's a great reference to just, like, for example, you get fatigued. All you got to do is click over and go, whoa, why does that record sound so dull? Well, if you know that record sounds really good, more than likely we've gone over the deep end on the high end. You know what I'm saying? So it's a guardrail for you.
Another thing which I find about the rough mixes, sometimes even if they're not happy with the rough mix, they're emotionally attached to something in that rough mix, and you've got to work out what that is.
Correct. And listen, and let me tell you something. A lot of times they may not know what they're doing, but part of what they did, even though it might sound horrible, those elements and where they were placed and how they wanted them, it's almost like you have to reverse engineer the mix. You mix it, and then you still keep the essence of what they were trying to do. That's usually where I think my clients have been the happiest with me, is when I've given them what they were trying to do. Not, let me just not hear nothing. Let me just do what I did with it. Because I'm not the creator of the record.
Well, no, it's like, I mean, that's another thing that I think a lot of people forget is it's like, yes, you're mixing it or you're producing it, but you're not the client. They're the client. So
exactly. Absolutely. Huge advice. Great advice.
Kevin has a question here, and Kevin, it's quite long. I'm going to abbreviate it a bit. How do you know which waves compressor to use and for what? He mentioned CLA2, CLA3A, 76, DBX 160, Puig Child. Okay. He says there's a lot of compressors out there. How do you find which one to use for what? And is there an advice for different genres of music, or you find that again it's per project?
It is per. I think it's individual to the song, but one of the things that is obvious is a great exercise for you to do is pop in a record that you did, whatever, a song, a session. Open up a session and pop in all those compressors and just A/B. Mute, next, mute, and listen, because these plugins, especially compressors, have such a character to them. And so for me, it's part that and part experience. So I already know what that CLA compressor is going to sound like. Sometimes I need it. I reach for it, but it's hard to reach for it if you haven't, believe it or not, made a lot of mistakes with it. You know what I mean? You start ruling out, okay, this is what I use it for. And, learn from guys like me, learn from guys like Mike, learn from everybody out there. But remember, when you try stuff, you need to start not copying, but becoming you. Use stuff that I learn stuff from my assistants all the time. Well, they're like, hey, listen to this. And I'm like, what'd you do there? And I'm like, wow, that's a cool little sound. And then it goes in my little bag, and we exchange information. We have no secrets. It's the operator. And that's why you have to learn to listen.
Yeah. There's one tip as well, if I might add, in StudioRack.
Sure.
One of the things, I actually have a setting in StudioRack that's called test compression, and it's 4 compressors all in a row, just so I can A and B,
A and B
between
exactly.
all of them, and
Correct.
then I'll save whichever one is a preset, and I'll save it for that song. So it's
right.
like, again, that's where StudioRack comes in. It's kind of like a palette of colors.
Absolutely. Like you said earlier about having even just like a vocal chain, that's my go a few. I mean, I have like about 10 of them, but pop it in, saved already, so I can bring it in. I may not use all the plugins, but I can quickly go. And I'm going to develop, I mean, as I'm working on it, I'm going to develop a ton for you guys for Waves 2. I'm going to do a bunch of presets because I think it's amazing to have a good solid starting point. Saves time.
So El Salvador, we have a message here from Fasu. I think I got your name right.
That's my guy. That's Fatso. That's my guy with this.
It is. He goes, me and all my nerd friends are tuning in from El Salvador. And he wants to know what your favorite master bus compressors are.
My favorite master bus compressor, to me, the master bus compressor that I'm using now, which I'm super hot on, I showed it to you already, is the Abbey Roads. And really, if you think about it, it's I don't do a lot of compression other than the limiting at the very end with an L2, right? But that's only for me. The L2 is not going to go to mastering. I literally leave the limiting and compression. I try to leave the limiting and compression to mastering. But I love, for example, let's look at this real quick. So this is the compressor part of the Abbey Roads, and if you notice, there's a mix section here. So I'm really paralleling the compressor. I'm actually bringing in about 18 or 19% into it. It's just to give it a little heat, a little energy. But this compressor sounds great. But because I'm using it that way, I don't exclusively just run a compressor. I don't take an SSL compressor and just do the whole mix to it. I don't like to commit to that. I feel like just as much respect as mix engineers get, so should mastering engineers, and they do this all day long too. And I like to leave it open for them to sort of, with the last compression touch on it.
It's actually one of the things we talked about in last week's open session that I did with Piper Payne. So if you haven't seen that, go back. One of the things we were talking about, because she used one of my songs for it, was the fact that the version she used to master was one that had nothing on the master bus.
Right.
So sometimes mixing into something, I don't know if you agree, but sometimes mixing into something can actually give you a false image of the mix.
Correct.
Yeah. We have another question here from Pedram. Pedram has an interesting question. He'd love to learn more about why some beats, like break beats, are more groovy and driving than other ones are. He goes, same BPM, same instruments, but there's some magic sometimes in some beats that makes you want to dance. Is it the compression? Is it the mix? Is it the EQ? It's an interesting question.
It's an interesting question. That's a very broad question because, that could be a production thing. It could be a creative thing, meaning, let's say you're making now we're going into a production thing. So let's say you're making a beat, right? The swing that you use to quantize the sounds can completely change the bounce. So what we do as far from the polishing, EQing, and that sort of thing, there's times, and the way we can kind of make a rhythm move too would be with compression, where the compressor maybe is sitting, feels good with the rhythm of it. So in other words, we're doing like a late threshold or a late attack, and then a fast release. Maybe the compressor comes in after the kick, and it gives you a little bit of a pump. But I've done a couple of records where I've had the entire mix grouped, or the entire music, I should say, grouped to a group as I have it now, and I've sidechained the kick and snare to sort of bounce the music around and create rhythm. But innately, if you just hear a beat, it's more than likely the way it was created. It's the time signature, the way it was programmed. I mean, that's why musical people, that's why they're so good at what they do.
There is a ton of questions here that are all about the end result and sending things. Since I mentioned mastering, talking about one of the questions, which I think is BZ is asking a question that I'm not sure whether is something you do or not. BZ is saying how to export the stems to get them mastered, and then there's somebody else who is saying do you balance your gain before the mix, and is it -18, -14, -12? How do you prepare things for mastering is another question out there. So what is, I mean, that's part of your chain that I'm sure that you have, that you've got down pat.
Absolutely. And it's really, they're just basically all in the realm of delivery. How do you deliver to master? And that's why, to me, I loved so much this plugin back to the Abbey Roads so much, because I use it as a preview, right? So it gives me, for example, this EQ I'm doing, it's a lot of EQ I'm doing on the whole entire master, right? But I may say, you know what? I love the way it sounds. I'll print it like this, put it to the side as examples from my mastering engineer, and then print without it and let them know, hey, listen, I printed this, just, we loved it. Maybe you could do it better. Maybe you can keep it. And that communication with the mastering engineer is important. But the way you generally deliver your stems are just the mixes that you need. So, for example, I always deliver a cappella or main, instrumental, a cappella, television or a show mix where we need the lead vocal, say, and then the clean version of all those. So I'll do clean a cappella, clean main. And those are enough for a mastering engineer and for the artist to get what they need. And the level you deliver it at, listen, you don't worry so much about the format, because the mastering engineer is the one who's going to deliver back to the client if it's going to be -14 for Spotify or whatever the iTunes or whatever you need it delivered for. What you want is to not smash your bus to smithereens where the guy can't do anything. So what I do is group my entire mix and trim it all back and get it to where it feels good, and then make sure that I'm hitting maybe 75 to 85% of the meter. That's good. You're fine. You don't have to be anal about that part. That gives the mastering engineer plenty of room to do what he's got to do.
So another thing, and I've seen a few questions that have popped up talking about, I think that we might need to define the term stems.
Okay, yeah, thank you. It's overused and used wrong.
So I mean, what you and I are talking about is instrumental,
passes.
Vocal up, vocal down, etc. But we're not talking about drums, vocals, bass, etc. When we're not talking about that, are we? When we're talking about this?
No. So when like you said, defining stems really are in a stem session that I deliver to, for example, a major project, a major label needs to have a master. In other words, a copy of the master Pro Tools session. And for the sake of just cleanliness and not having everything, sort of wired or routed into each other, which an A&R guy, the label's not going to understand. What I do is I record everything back to Pro Tools. So I will take a kick, stripe it across with everything I have on it, obviously after it's approved by the client, and then basically assemble a whole new session of all those prints, deliver them all at 0, and that's now effectively the master that the label owns. And those are actual stems. So it would be a kick stem, snare stem, hi-hat stem, bass, piano, vocal, lead vocal, all that, so on. And then the deliveries that we were talking about before, the instrumental, a cappella, mains are what I call passes or prints or
which
mixes.
Is what goes to the mastering engineer.
Correct. And the reason why labels will ask for that is because sometimes somebody might want to make a remix and they want to be able to have all the sounds, and you don't want to send your mix, not because you don't want people to see your mix. It's just a train wreck when they work another way, and all they want is just the mix they heard and the elements they want to be able to pull out. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So we have a message here from Jackson who says, hi, how far should producers trying to mix their track before sending it to a professional mix engineer?
Go for it. Go for it, man.
Really?
Yeah, I love it. To be honest with you, I learned this early on in my career where I don't even remember what it was. It was like a phone sort of effect with a vocal, and we were in the room working together, and we were sitting there popping in gear at the time. We had gear and some plugins, and I thought, listen, man, you did this. Like, why are we reinventing? You did this, sounded good, right? Yeah. We went back, got the original stem we printed, put it in the song. We're like, we're done with it. Like, what are we doing? So to me, production bleeds into mixing. So to me, so many things that make give a song a character, we may keep. Like, there's times where I'll have a mix in it, and they say to me, hey, you want to send you everything, or do you want me to stripe it clean? I either say to them, send both or shoot it to me. I don't mind cleaning it up because there'll be something super signature that I'll just keep. Why am I going to reinvent that if it works? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I do.
And I've done that hundreds of times. Yeah, absolutely.
Limelight says, Lou, is it possible to get a good mix using a good pair of headphones?
That's relative. You
Because a lot of
can
people these days are
are
working solely on a pair of these.
they are. I have a few that are pretty good. I got to say, I'm not a big fan of it, But a bunch of people, friends of mine, were starting to do that. They were like, "Hey, you should try this. You should try that." And I actually got a pair that I was like, "Wow, these are pretty good," but they're not the cheapest. They're not $100. You know what I mean? But if you can, if that's your only option, for sure, you're still going to learn. You're still going to have a reference point. And if that's the case, you have a small pair of speakers or you have a headphones, like Mike said, man, grab a record that sounds good to you everywhere. Listen to it and get to know what it sounds like on these headphones. And little by little, your ear will adapt to that. Just like your car, you know what sounds good in your car because you're there all the time.
Right.
Same thing, That's why we have a car test.
Do you find that in working with hip hop artists that there can be an over exaggerated leaning on a subwoofer sometimes an R bass when they go and listen to it in the studio, and then they'll go and listen to it in the car and say it doesn't sound anything like it does in the studio because of. How do you deal with that? Because I mean, it's like I know in Miami that's something that comes up quite a lot.
Right. Again, that's something to be said about a good room. To invest money in a good room, good treated room, monitors that are worth, investing in because they're giving you good information. But by the same token, like we're kind of touching on this earlier about people listening to music on their laptop or on a smaller system or iPhone. There's frequencies no matter what we do are just not going to come out of there. So you have to be mindful of that so that the record's feel comes out through it. But be careful, not to just throw subwoofers in your room and just turn them all the way up. Like all you're doing is you're going to come up with the flattest mixes ever because you're not. If I sit here and listen to a record and I got a subwoofer cranked up, and it's gonna deter me from pushing more bass or pushing more 30 or 40 hertz because I feel like it's enough. And then you go to the next spot and you have no bottom. So you got to learn how to tune a room.
I have an interesting question here from Andrew who says, "Hey Lou, thank you for doing this." He says, "My question is about a trend that I'm hearing in rap vocal sounds these days. I would describe it as a more processed sound compared to rap vocals of the 90s and early 2000s. We're getting to the question here. A lot of vocals have tuning on them, but what he is hearing is a boxy sound. Is that maybe a result of too much multiband compression or limiting? And what are your thoughts on tuning now compared to tuning in the 90s and early 2000s in hip hop?"
Gotcha. So for me, I wear two hats. I'm a producer and I'm a mix engineer as well. What I've learned over the years as a mix engineer exclusively is that you have to be mindful that because we have everybody with a laptop could be a producer and a beat maker. And listen, I love it. It's more creativity, more music in the world. It's great. But there's a lot of mistakes, if you will, even though there's no mistakes in music that are made that slide through that sometimes don't even get mastered and get put out into the sphere. And people love the song. They connect with it emotionally, but it's crazy sounding, right? Well, think about that. So now suddenly that record can change the rules. It takes one Rolling Loud concert for you to go home and go, I want to sound just like that, right? So you remember that this industry is constantly fluid. It's constantly moving. So even records that slide through the cracks and don't get professionally touched and get to the top, now people are like, how do I sound like that? So you're actually trying to sound not as good. That's what I mean, saturation, it's distortion. And it sounds amazing, right? So keep in mind that that's what it is. As a producer and as an engineer, that music, because you hear something that sounds boxy, it could have been a mistake. And then it developed into a sound. You know what I mean? I found that with a lot of clients I've had there that I had to accept that. That's a big part of growth as an engineer is knowing it's wrong and letting it go because people like it.
Right. Okay, so let's go back to your vocals. We've got a few people asking about a couple of different parts of the vocals. One of them is they're saying, a couple of people have said these vocals sound very uncompressed and very clean and filled with clarity.
Right.
And another, which is a compliment, definitely, because they do sound amazing. Another question is, how do you go about tuning your vocals in a track like this? And again, is it different every time, or is it all to do with style of the artist, or what's the approach approach.
In some cases, I'll get the tuning coming from the artist already. They worked on it. They got the plugin that they use. In other cases, it's just to kind of keep them. They're great singers. They just need, sort of guardrails. Make sure it's a little more in pocket. And other times, it's merely for the effect. They wanted to have that sort of like T-Pain sound, for lack of a better term. So with that being said, tuning is sort of relative, right? It's what the artist wants to achieve. And so in that case, like I'm using just the real-time waves here, wave tunes, and it works. It just keeps them in there, and I'm actually pushing a little bit of it so that it has a little bit of that twang. It gives you that feel.
One of the things I love about this plugin is how it is virtually 000 latency.
Oh yeah, it is.
In fact, if you put this plugin on a track and then you duplicate the vocal and you have the vocal without this plugin on, they will phase each other out. That's how little latency this plugin has.
That's amazing.
I love this plugin.
Yeah.
I mean, tuning is one of those things that a lot of artists don't really talk about because, but so we have to.
Yeah.
Is there a point when you're dealing with a new artist in hip hop or any of the side where you actually will put a tuning component on their vocal while they're actually singing to give them more confidence while they're singing, or is it something that's always afterwards?
Well, this is the thing. So I'm one of the guys that I don't record. It's not that I don't like it. I just haven't done it in so long that all I do is.
But you did.
But I did, right? But when I did, there wasn't much autotune. It was a little different time. But just to what you're saying, yes, I think a lot of people, and mind you, as a producer, I'll work with an engineer who's recording. So there's times we do want to record with autotune in there because we're working with songwriters and necessarily not great singers who just want to get the idea down quickly, right? But the tuning is so important because sometimes it gives a character. It's a character people like. Remember, these tools were made to just correct pitch so it wasn't obvious. But now it's become an effect. I mean, forever now. And because of that, it's now a palette. It's a little bit of a creative palette. So I usually try not to do it if I can record. If I'm recording or not, if I'm recording, my people are recording it, or I have a client that I have a relationship with, tell them, look, don't record it. But if they do, listen, they're committed. That's what they wanted. So I'm happy to have it that way. It's really about the vision that the creator, the artist, or the producer has.
But I think that's one of the things that is super awesome about digital audio compared to when you and I both first started, which is we had to really commit to a sound.
Totally, man. That was it.
On tape.
On the fly. Yeah.
On the fly. And I think a term that gets overused sometimes now is fix it in the mix. It's like it's much better to get a decent sound straight up front, which is why you also said don't record with a de-esser on it because you can't go back on that one.
Right, and don't overcompress.
We have a few questions here from Slava. Slava, I'm not ignoring you. There's a ton of questions here. Can you please tell more about using a few similar instruments at the same time and balancing and while panning them? So I'm thinking basically he's talking like a lot of different instruments that might have the same frequencies. How do you get them to separate? And he goes, thanks a lot for the replies and for this quarantine seminar.
No, listen, it's my pleasure doing it. It really depends. Like for example, guitars. For example, like I just did like a little rock project. It's all about panning to me. It's all about imaging. Not a huge tool is placing things out of the mono field, right, and putting them out there. And sometimes it's the vision of the producer. Sometimes producers will say, "Here's a piano, a pad, a Rhodes." And all playing the same exact chords, and they're really seeing it as one instrument. With that in mind, you got to be mindful that you don't mess with that relation because that's what you try to create, or he or she. So it's a very sort of broad question because it depends on what it is. Now, if it's a shot to you and you're like, look, do what you want with it, panning helps. Leveling sometimes, also being able to recognize how important it is in the song. There's times where people are like spend tons of time on these sounds that really were meant to be way in the back. Which brings me back to the last few questions ago, which is that's why I like the artist's MP3, because I'll know that little string that I thought was so important is barely audible. They don't really care about it. It was just supposed to be to the right a little bit, and I had it as a lead. You follow what I'm saying? So it's important to really always check back with what the intent is of the producer, artist, or the project.
Good answer. What we're also a question here. Enrico has a question that's a great follow on to that one, which is,
Okay.
how do you know when a mix is done?
Man, that's a great question. Um, I think for me, I've gone down to a system, right? Because there's a sort of life will give you limits, which is called time, right? So what happens is if you're busy, and I'm very blessed to be busy, I literally mix every single day of my life. Um, I can't just spend 2 weeks on a mix, right? Not that I haven't done it. Um, but I got a system where I'll get the mix. My beautiful wife does all my booking and all that, so I don't have to worry about that. I just show up and do it and start pushing buttons. And what I do is I try to get good sleep and be sharp and spend that day really doing the attack mode, I call it, where you go and just get it all the ideas you have and as finished as possible till you're fatigued. Then sleep. I get the next day and I do a ton of changes. Like I said, because I'm gonna be like, whoa, wait, I overdid that. That wasn't what I wanted. If you have the luxury to spend a couple of days on a mix, to me, I would say 2 days, maximum 5 days. If you're a week on a project, man, it's time to it's the operator. You know what I mean? Go back, man. Don't be afraid to fail. Go back, start over, strip it all down, listen to other stuff, and you'll get there. Don't frustrate yourself because you'll sort of go backwards a little bit. Just put it away, put it behind you.
I think if I can add anything to that as well, is it's a bit like cooking something. You have to have an idea of what you want it to be at the end before you start. Otherwise, you don't have a direction. So,
correct. Yeah.
Okay.
Hey,
so
listen, real quick. Don't be afraid that if you worked for 3 hours and it sounds great, and the next day you check and it sounds great, you made no changes. That's good. Like don't just do that because I said it. Sometimes you nail it, and it's it. Let it go.
Those are magical times. I wish I had more of those.
They're very rare, man. They're very rare.
Sal has a question. Sal,
Okay.
Sal saying, Lou, loudness wars.
Oh,
How have you,
jeez.
it's gonna come up every time.
Yeah, it does.
How have you heard sound evolve over time, and where is sound going, in your opinion, when it comes to the loudness wars?
At the beginning, it was a lack of education. People didn't really know like in other words, an artist didn't know, oh, my record I just wanted to be louder than the next person's record. That's really what the loudness war was all about. But understanding that when you smash something on a limiter just to get it louder doesn't mean it's going to be louder than the other, your competition song, for example, or mix. So the loudness word to me now I'm starting to see the daylight because people like Spotify and iTunes are all pretty much standardizing their level. So everybody sits at the same level, no matter how hot you turned it in. And this is the thing. So that brings you back to listening, because if I'm my master, I take an L2 and I pull it back, the mix is going to get super loud, right? But remember, that's just volume. What you're trying to hear, what is it actually doing to the mix, right? So I'm not saying limiting isn't good. It's great. I love it. You have the maximum volume output, right? But what is it actually doing? So you need to listen to make sure you don't overdo it, because if you overlimit something just for the sake of it being louder, you're going to kill all your dynamics. And the way a monitor works, these monitors need to go out and back in. And if you go out and stay out, it's maybe loud, and you're going to go to a company. Why is my track sound so synthetic and it doesn't move me? You're not giving that speaker a chance to come back out and push the air out again. I know that's a little more into the physics world, but that's the problem.
A great answer. Yeah.
Right. So if you have a balance between the two, some people are too purist to me, and I'm like, come on, bro, this is hip hop. We got to give them some volume, So there in the middle, there is where you should be, and I think where we're at now.
It's actually an amazing answer, guys.
Oh, thank you, man.
You realize how lucky you are for that one. Alexander has a question, and I always go to the polite one. So it's Mr. Diaz.
This Mr. Diaz thing is killing me.
I got a question. He says, when I balance my high frequencies in the mix and it looks right, I reference to a popular record, and that record always sounds much brighter. What's the secret, or what am I missing?
Mastering. So this is the thing. So remember that when you listen to a record, more than likely it was mastered. So don't try to match it so close. Keep in mind that what you're listening to has already had the last step, which is these great mastering engineers who are going to take it and put an EQ or a compressor over the whole thing. Imaging, they do all kinds. I mean, they're a crucial part of what we do. So what I use ABs that have been mastered for more than anything is just the punch, the placement, the overall, sort of feel of a record. But I'm careful not to go, I gotta be that bright, or I gotta be that, low endy, or I gotta be that punchy, because sometimes a master engineer added that. So I know it's kind of hard to say, well, then why would you use it as a reference point? Because at least you have a good sort of idea of where you want to wind up, right? So there's a lot of prediction that goes on with what we do. That's why I use the Abbey Roads on the master, because I'm predicting what it may come back like with mastering. So I try things and turn it off, and then, you know what I mean? There's a back and forth that goes on for hours. I do that sometimes forever, it seems. But because then I'm giving a master engineer, literally, I know what he's going to be able to do with it. And so what I can do on one plugin, he may be able to do with an entire studio dedicated to that only, take the record to a whole nother level. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah. So what kind of volumes are you listening? Because I mean, I think another thing that I haven't seen it's come up yet, but it usually is a question that should come up, is monitoring volumes. Again, with ear fatigue, especially if you're mixing, it's like you're not gonna hear a lot of those subtle changes in frequencies at really loud volumes if you're monitoring.
Right.
Really low.
Yeah, it depends what you're listening for. So if I'm listening for low end punch and excitement and violence, for lack of a better word, I'm going to go loud. But that doesn't mean I'm going to go loud for 10 hours. I'm going to go loud for a while. I'm a little bit of a maniac, and listen, we all have our different flavors and choices, but I'm a little bit of a maniac. I'm not going to lie. I've slowed down. I'm trying to be smart. But if I'm at the low end and I just finished it, I need to hear what this sounds like at 110 dB. I'm going to go there. And if my shirt starts doing this, right, then
you're winning.
I'm winning. Yeah. And then I go back, and then if I'm going to listen to the details of a plate, of course I'm going to listen to a low level and nice monitors. And you have to learn this. This is not a one system works for everything, but you got to level of monitoring is all about what you're listening to.
So I have a question here from, I'm going to do 3 more questions, and then we're going to start closing up. So we've got one here from Karen, who says, "Hi, Lou. I was wondering what is your workflow when using a reference track? What are the main things that you listen for first?"
Well, my workflow for me, because I started as a drummer, I'm just partial to drums, right? I think like the main thing is, before I even put a reference up, I want to get to know the song. So I'll just throw up the session and I'll do a quick sort of like run through it, where I kind of place the drums where they're supposed to be, listen to some of the keys, even if I miss some of the keys, just to get a general idea of where the vocal's going to sit. And it gives me a good idea of like, all right, this is the palette I got, now what? And then I start bringing in the references. Really, probably I'd say 30% into the mix, I'll start bringing some references in to go, where am I here? Because remember, once you get to know the record, then you start thinking, "Ooh, this reminds me of this," or it should fit in with that type of record. I'll go find it, bring it in, and then start comparing and start working from there. You know what I mean? And then I'll even listen to records that are completely the opposite, just to make sure you have an opposite reference. That's like, that's pretty dark and it works. You know what I mean? Like, these things are so subjective that it's very hard to, all these questions are great, but it's very difficult to answer them in like simple A and B. You know what I mean? This is like the entire alphabet squared.
So we have another, your favorite one. We have another, Max. Hello, Mr. Diaz. Hope you are doing well.
I'm doing well. Thank you, Max. Thanks.
Just want to ask you, when an indie musician sending tracks out to an engineer, is it okay to send the vocals compressed and EQ'd before doing everything else? And is it okay to send ad-libs and backings as a group only, or do they need to be individually leveled and panned, but with out individual panning and compression? So I think he's asking, how do you send that kind of stuff?
Correct. For me, every guy works a different way. I'm not a big clean everything up and send it to me all at 0, and I don't want any of your plugins. I'm all about shoot it the way you have it. Now, mind you, if we're talking about you popping plugins in, if you're saying you recorded it with compression or you recorded it with EQ, that's a different story, because I cannot do that, right? But if you got plugins and you have a setup and You already got your ad-libs, like you said, grouped. Shoot them to me that way. It doesn't matter. I'm going to listen to what you did and go, I'm going to undo that. That's the great thing about working in Pro Tools or DWAs is that you can undo it. And in fact, I can make a copy of everything, keep your stuff, and continue comparing what I'm doing to what you did, right? So that's why, like a question a few minutes ago about should producers mix, go for it. Go for it, because those give me more information on what you're trying to achieve. And if you're making a mistake, I'll be able to give you the mistake you're making, I'll correct it.
That's a beautiful thing about working with the pro guys is like gives you, it's just working with somebody like Lu will actually educate you at the same time. So it's an adventure and a learning experience. Rayshawn says, "Hey Lu, thanks for everything today. How do you know in a mix what to do first, as in EQ, compression, etc.? Where do you?" So I think the question is, where do you start?
Yeah. Well, for me, like I said earlier, I usually start on the drums. Like first thing I'm going to sort of attack is going to be, all right, I did a sort of a quick run through, put everything sort of in a balance and think, okay, this is what it sounds like. I'll maybe put a compressor on the vocal to bring it up just for now as a reference. And then I'll go right to the low end. I'll start working on the low end snare, kick, boom, snare, kick, bass, and just get that feeling pretty good. And then I'll jump over to the vocal, put it on top of it and see, okay, they're even, they're good. And then I start putting things in, elements, keys and stuff. And then, of course, I'm going to go right back again and change everything I did. But that's what I'm comfortable with. I always come from the drums because to me, I know they're second to the vocal, but they're so important to me that if that vocal's sitting right and the music and the kick, snare, and boom are supporting that vocal, that's the meat of the mix. The rest of the stuff to me is just the color. They're important. Don't get me wrong. I've spent a lot of times correcting pads. You know what I mean? But the center, the mono, and that's where it all happens. Imagine the impact.
So we've been doing this. We've educated people on drums, vocals, painting, reference tracks. This has been a true hip hop masterclass. Let's if you had to give people who want to be where you are in your career and are just starting out one piece of advice right now, what do you think it would be?
One piece of advice. I mean, I would say that like earlier we spoke about it. Don't get too caught up in chasing the money. I know. Listen, it's tough. Making a living at this isn't easy at the beginning. It certainly wasn't for me. But I noticed that if your passion isn't there or your love for it isn't there, you're already lost the race, man. Because there's going to be people there who have more passion and more want than you do. So don't chase the dollar, man. Do it because you love it, and trust that as your craft gets better and better, they're going to notice. And listen, clients will notice, but one day you get that one client becomes a giant star, you have a giant platform. And if you say I mixed that record, what, you can't buy that advertising. I don't care how much money you spend on Facebook.
You see, yeah, that's the other side to that is, it's like, don't try and pay your way through ads to be. It's like just your good work. So,
there's a balance there, man. There's a balance, but to have faith, don't lose faith, and don't be afraid to fail. Just go, man. Get them out of the way.
And tools like StudioRack help because they help you actually experiment and improve your craft as you go, and then you can save chains of plugins as you go.
Yeah, that's huge. That's the part that I'm so excited about. I mean, like I said, I'm only on it for a very short period, and I'm already like, I'm so busy that I'm anxious to get in there and add more stuff and try it out more.
So Lu, this has been a huge amount of fun. I think everybody.
Cool, thank you. Likewise, man. Likewise. I love it.
Super grateful, folks. From Lu and I, we really, really do thank you for coming on today.
Thank you, guys. I appreciate you guys
and watching this. It's like we do these Waves Open sessions to help people learn and hopefully change a life here and there.
Yeah.
So on Lu, on behalf of me and all of the Waves team and all of the users out there, thank you so much.
Appreciate that, man. I appreciate the support. I appreciate all the kind words. I get a ton of emails all the time, and just know that if I don't answer, it isn't out of being Hollywood, man. I only got so many hours in the day, but I appreciate every one of you. And like he said, go, man. Don't give up. Don't be afraid to fail. Go for it.
Okay, so you have some of the wisest words you're going to hear right now, right there. So, Lu, thank you so much. Everybody out in Wavesland, from me, MPA, and Waves, much love to you. And we will see you next week for the Waves Open Sessions. Take care.
Yes, sir. Take care, guys. Peace.
I ain't fucking with you no more. I ain't fucking with you no more. I just got a text on my phone that said vive tu vida. I look at the devil and told him God bless you, my nigga, que Dios te bendiga. I don't want none of that energy, you don't want none of this either. You know I'm a death, so you can't be my friend, but you won't be my enemy neither. All of my niggas don't know 'cause they all got 3 shirts that they signed to Adidas. I heard life a hoe, I don't